Everyone is rushing, not because life demands it, but because the mind is afraid to be still. We chase answers, peace, meaning, and belonging, believing that if we stop moving, we will lose our place in the world. Yet the Buddha taught that suffering is not born from stopping but from grasping. Look closely at the mind when it chases. It is never satisfied. It is never present. It is always leaning toward a future that does not exist yet. This teaching is not about withdrawal or passivity. It is about releasing the tension that keeps the mind restless. When chasing ends, time softens. When time softens, clarity returns. And when clarity returns, life begins to unfold without resistance. Stay with this, because the moment you stop chasing is not a loss. It is the moment wisdom begins to lead. Chasing reveals a lack of trust in time. In Buddhism, impatience is not seen as ambition or strength, but as a misunderstanding of how life actually unfolds. When a person is impatient, they are not motivated by wisdom, but by discomfort with the present moment. Chasing reveals an inner belief that what is happening now is somehow incomplete or incorrect. It suggests that peace, success, love, or meaning must exist somewhere else, in a future moment that has not yet arrived. This way of thinking quietly rejects the present and replaces it with a constant sense of waiting. The Buddha taught that everything arises through causes and conditions. Nothing appears simply because we want it to. Just as a seed cannot be forced to become a tree before its time, the events of life cannot be rushed without consequence. When we chase outcomes, we are trying to skip the natural unfolding of causes. We demand results without allowing the necessary conditions to mature. This demand creates tension within the mind, because the mind is pushing against reality instead of understanding it. Chasing often comes from fear. It is the fear that time is running out, that others are moving ahead, or that if we slow down, we will be left behind. This fear makes the present moment feel like an obstacle instead of a foundation. We begin to see now as something to escape rather than something to inhabit. From a Buddhist perspective, this is a form of suffering created by the mind itself, because the present moment is the only place where life is actually happening. When we stop chasing, we are not giving up on growth or effort. We are changing our relationship with time. We begin to trust that life unfolds in a rhythm that cannot be controlled by anxiety or force. Trusting time means understanding that preparation, patience, and awareness are not delays but essential parts of the path. When this understanding deepens, urgency loosens its grip, and the mind becomes calmer and more stable. The Buddha emphasized mindfulness as a way to return to the present without resistance. By becoming fully aware of what is happening now, we stop arguing with time and stop demanding that it move faster. This does not make life stagnant. Instead, it allows actions to arise naturally from clarity rather than panic. Decisions made from this state are wiser and less reactive. Living inside time fully means accepting that every stage has its purpose. Waiting is no longer experienced as emptiness, but as quiet preparation. Progress no longer feels stressful because it is no longer driven by fear. When chasing ends, suffering reduces, and life becomes something we participate in rather than something we are constantly trying to outrun. Chasing is fear trying to control the unknown. Fear does not always appear as panic or anxiety. Very often fear appears as restlessness, planning, overthinking, and constant movement toward outcomes. Chasing is one of the most subtle forms of fear because it disguises itself as effort and responsibility. On the surface it looks like determination, but underneath it is the discomfort of not knowing how things will turn out. The mind chases because it wants certainty, not because certainty is available, but because uncertainty feels unbearable. The Buddha taught that craving arises from aversion. We crave answers because we are averse to doubt. We crave outcomes because we are averse to waiting. We chase clarity because we are averse to sitting with not knowing. This craving is known as tanha, the thirst that fuels suffering. When we chase, we are not moving toward peace. We are moving away from discomfort. The problem is that discomfort cannot be escaped by control, only understood through awareness. The unknown is not a problem in Buddhist teaching. It is a natural condition of existence. Everything is changing, and because everything is changing, certainty is always temporary. The mind, however, wants fixed ground. It wants guarantees, labels, and clear conclusions. When it cannot find them, it tries to manufacture control by forcing decisions, rushing conversations, or pushing situations forward before they are ready. This creates stress because reality does not respond well to being controlled. When a person stops chasing, they are not becoming passive or careless. They are learning to stay present with uncertainty without collapsing into fear. This is a form of inner strength. The Buddha described this as equanimity, the ability to remain balanced in the face of what cannot be predicted. Equanimity does not remove uncertainty, but it removes the suffering caused by resisting it. Fear always wants to close possibilities quickly. Awareness keeps them open. When chasing stops, the mind begins to observe instead of manipulate. It becomes curious rather than defensive. In this state, understanding grows naturally. Often, what we were trying to force becomes clear on its own, simply because we stopped interfering with it. Learning to live with the unknown does not mean abandoning effort. It means shifting effort from control to clarity. Instead of pushing outcomes, we focus on our actions, intentions, and understanding in the present moment. This aligns with the Buddha's teaching of right effort, effort that is guided by wisdom rather than fear. When fear no longer drives the mind, chasing loses its urgency. Life feels less like a problem to solve and more like a process to participate in. The unknown remains, but it no longer feels threatening. It becomes space, and within that space, peace begins to grow. What you chase gains power over you. The mind is shaped by what it clings to. Whatever the mind repeatedly reaches for begins to dominate attention, emotion, and behavior. When you chase something, whether it is success, love, recognition, or certainty, you are quietly handing over authority to that object. Your inner state becomes dependent on whether you are moving closer to it or farther away from it. This is how power shifts from the mind to the object of desire. The Buddha explained that attachment binds the mind to conditions. When happiness depends on something external, suffering is already present, even before loss occurs. Chasing intensifies this dependency. The mind becomes restless, constantly measuring progress, comparing outcomes, and anticipating results. Peace is postponed into the future, as if it can only be earned once the goal is reached. In this state, the present moment loses its value, and awareness narrows around the chase. What gains power over you does not need to be harmful in itself. Even positive goals can become sources of suffering when they are pursued with attachment. The issue is not desire, but the relationship to desire. Chasing transforms desire into compulsion. The mind no longer chooses freely, it reacts. Emotional stability rises and falls depending on external movement, creating a fragile sense of self. From a Buddhist perspective, this loss of inner authority is the root of dissatisfaction. The Buddha taught that freedom begins when the mind is no longer governed by craving. When you stop chasing, you interrupt this cycle. You are no longer pulled forward by the promise of future satisfaction. Instead, attention returns to the present, where awareness and balance can be restored. Stopping the chase does not mean abandoning goals or responsibilities. It means reclaiming inner power by loosening dependence. You continue to act, but your actions are no longer fueled by anxiety or fear of lack. When effort arises from clarity rather than attachment, It becomes steady and sustainable. The mind is no longer exhausted by constant wanting. As chasing slows, something important happens. The mind begins to notice how much energy was being surrendered to anticipation and worry. With that energy reclaimed, there is more space for calm, insight, and compassion. You begin to experience a sense of autonomy that does not rely on external validation or outcomes. The Buddha described this state as non-clinging, not as indifference, but as freedom. When nothing has power over you, everything can be experienced more fully. Success no longer inflates the ego, and loss no longer destroys inner balance. By no longer chasing, you step out of psychological dependency and return to inner stability. This is not withdrawal from life, but a deeper participation in it, grounded in awareness rather than compulsion. Stillness strips desire down to truth. Stillness is not emptiness, and it is not avoidance. Stillness is the condition in which the mind can finally see itself clearly. Most desire survives because it is never examined. Movement, distraction, and constant activity keep desire alive by preventing awareness from settling. When the mind is always busy, it does not ask why it wants what it wants. Stillness removes that protection. When chasing stops, desire no longer has somewhere to hide. The Buddha taught that desire itself is not the enemy, but unexamined craving is. There is a difference between a natural intention and a craving rooted in fear, comparison, or lack. When the mind becomes still, this difference becomes obvious. Some desires weaken as soon as attention rests on them. Without constant reinforcement, they lose urgency and fade naturally. Others remain, but in a quieter and more honest form, no longer demanding immediate satisfaction. Stillness allows desire to be felt fully, without reaction. Instead of acting on it, the mind observes it. This observation reveals the underlying causes. A desire for achievement may reveal fear of inadequacy. A desire for closeness may reveal fear of loneliness. A desire for control may reveal fear of uncertainty. When these roots are seen, desire is no longer confusing. It becomes information rather than command. The Buddha emphasized mindfulness as the tool that transforms craving into understanding. When the mind is still, it can notice how desire arises, how it changes, and how it passes away if not fed. This direct observation breaks the illusion that desire must be obeyed. The mind learns that wanting does not equal necessity. This realization brings freedom, because action is no longer automatic. In stillness, false desires dissolve because they were never sustained by wisdom. They were sustained by habit. When habit is interrupted, truth surfaces. What remains is simpler and more aligned. Desires that are consistent with well-being and clarity persist without urgency. They do not disturb the mind. They coexist with patience. Stillness also reveals that many desires were attempts to escape discomfort rather than genuine needs. When the mind learns to sit with discomfort without resistance, the need to chase diminishes, desire becomes less dramatic and more honest. It stops shouting and starts speaking quietly. By stripping desire down to its truth, stillness restores choice. The mind can now respond rather than react. This is what the Buddha meant by liberation through understanding. Desire no longer controls the direction of life. It becomes one experience among many, observed clearly and held lightly. In this way, stillness does not remove desire, but purifies it, leaving only what truly serves freedom and balance. Urgency destroys judgment. Wisdom arises from clarity, not speed. Urgency is not a sign of importance, but a sign that the mind has become pressured by fear or craving. When the mind feels rushed, it narrows its attention and loses the ability to see situations fully. This is why urgency weakens judgment. It forces decisions before understanding has matured, and actions taken from this state often lead to regret. The Buddha taught that right action depends on right view, and right view cannot exist in a hurried mind. Urgency creates a sense that something must be resolved immediately, or else something bad will happen. This belief pushes the mind into survival mode. In this state, the mind prioritizes relief over wisdom. It seeks to escape discomfort quickly rather than understand it patiently. When urgency takes over, subtle details are ignored. Warning signs are overlooked. Long-term consequences are dismissed in favor of short-term relief. The mind convinces itself that acting fast is better than waiting, even when waiting would provide greater clarity. This is how urgency distorts perception. It compresses time and removes the space needed for insight. From a Buddhist perspective, urgency is a form of attachment to outcome. The mind is no longer present with what is happening now. It is preoccupied with what must happen next. This attachment pulls awareness away from the present moment, where wisdom naturally arises. Without presence, judgment becomes reactive rather than intentional. When chasing stops, urgency begins to dissolve. The mind learns that it does not need to rush in order to be safe or effective. Stillness allows awareness to widen. With more space, the mind can see multiple possibilities instead of only one pressured path. This broader perspective restores discernment and patience. The Buddha emphasized the importance of mindfulness in daily action. Mindfulness slows the mind without stopping movement. It allows decisions to arise from observation rather than impulse. When urgency is replaced with mindfulness, actions become deliberate and grounded. They are no longer driven by fear of missing out or fear of loss. As urgency fades, judgment strengthens. The mind becomes capable of waiting without anxiety. It understands that clarity cannot be forced, and that insight appears when conditions are ready. This patience protects the mind from unnecessary suffering. In this way, letting go of urgency is not laziness or delay. It is an act of wisdom. By refusing to act from pressure, the mind preserves its ability to choose well. When urgency no longer destroys judgment, life becomes less chaotic and more intentional, guided by understanding rather than fear. Force interrupts life's natural movement. Life is understood as a continuous flow of causes and conditions. Nothing stands still, and nothing moves in isolation. When actions arise in harmony with these conditions, life moves smoothly. When force is applied, resistance appears. Force is the attempt to bend reality to personal desire without fully understanding the conditions that shape it. This interruption creates friction, not progress. The Buddha taught that suffering arises when we resist the way things are. Force is a form of resistance. It comes from the belief that if we push hard enough, reality will comply. But reality does not respond to pressure in the way the mind expects. When force is used, the natural rhythm of events is disrupted, often creating unintended consequences. What seems like control in the moment becomes instability later. Force is different from effort. Effort in Buddhism is guided by wisdom and patience, while force is driven by impatience and fear. Effort works with conditions, nurturing them until they mature. Force ignores conditions and demands immediate results. This difference is subtle but important. One builds momentum, the other creates strain. When a person stops forcing outcomes, they begin to notice how life already moves on its own. Opportunities arise when the mind is open. Solutions appear when the mind is calm. Force blocks these movements because it tightens attention around a single desired outcome. This narrowing prevents awareness from recognizing alternative paths that may be more suitable or beneficial. The Buddha emphasized right effort, which means applying energy in a balanced and skillful way. Right effort does not exhaust the mind or body. It supports growth without violence toward the present moment. Force, on the other hand, exhausts because it requires constant tension. It keeps the mind in a state of struggle, always pushing, never resting. When chasing ends, force naturally weakens. The mind becomes less aggressive toward life and more receptive to its signals. This receptivity allows life's natural movement to resume. Events unfold with less resistance, and progress feels smoother, even when challenges remain. By letting go of force, one does not become passive. Action continues, but it is guided by awareness rather than urgency. The mind listens before acting. It observes conditions before intervening. This creates harmony between intention and reality. In Buddhism, harmony is not achieved by domination, but by understanding. When force is released, life regains its natural direction. Effort becomes sustainable, movement becomes meaningful, and actions align with the deeper flow of existence. This is how suffering lessens, not by pushing harder, but by moving wisely with what already is. Detachment is the return of inner power. Detachment is often misunderstood as indifference or withdrawal from life. In reality, detachment is the restoration of inner power. It is the moment when the mind stops depending on external conditions for stability and peace. When a person is attached, their inner state is constantly influenced by what happens outside them. When attachment loosens, control returns to the mind itself. The Buddha taught that attachment binds us to suffering because it makes happiness conditional. When peace depends on outcomes, approval or possession, the mind becomes vulnerable. Detachment removes this vulnerability. It does not remove care or responsibility, but it removes dependence. The mind can now engage with life without being controlled by it. Chasing strengthens attachment because it reinforces the belief that fulfillment exists outside the present moment. Detachment reverses this belief. It teaches the mind that well-being does not require constant acquisition or confirmation. When chasing ends, the mind experiences a sense of steadiness that does not rise and fall with circumstances. This steadiness is power. It allows a person to act without desperation and to speak without fear. Decisions become clearer because they are not influenced by the need to secure outcomes. The Buddha described this as non-clinging, a state in which the mind holds experiences lightly. Nothing is rejected, but nothing is grasped. Detachment also changes how challenges are experienced. Without attachment, loss does not destroy inner balance, and success does not inflate the ego. Both are seen as temporary conditions rather than definitions of self. This perspective protects the mind from extremes and keeps it grounded in awareness. As detachment deepens, the mind becomes more resilient. It no longer collapses under uncertainty or change. Instead, it adapts. This adaptability is not weakness but strength. It allows the mind to remain open and responsive without being overwhelmed. The Buddha emphasized that freedom comes from understanding the impermanent nature of all things. Detachment arises naturally from this understanding. When the mind sees that everything changes, it stops clinging, and when clinging ends, inner power returns. This power is quiet but profound. It is the power to remain calm when outcomes are unclear, to remain kind when circumstances are difficult, and to remain balanced when life shifts unexpectedly. Detachment does not remove engagement with life. It refines it. It allows action to arise from wisdom rather than fear, restoring the mind to its natural strength and stability. Alignment never needs persuasion. Harmony arises when actions, intentions, and conditions are in accord. Alignment is not something that needs to be forced or argued into existence. It reveals itself naturally when the mind is clear and free from craving. Persuasion becomes necessary only when there is resistance, and resistance is often a sign that something is not aligned with the present conditions. The Buddha taught that right action flows from right understanding. When understanding is present, action feels natural and unstrained. There is no need to convince, pressure, or repeatedly explain. Alignment expresses itself through ease. When something truly belongs, it does not require constant effort to maintain. It supports itself through mutual responsiveness. Chasing often leads to persuasion because the mind is attached to a specific outcome. When desire is fixed, the mind attempts to override reality instead of listening to it. This results in repeated attempts to justify, explain, or push. From a Buddhist perspective, this is the mind arguing with conditions rather than observing them. Alignment does not argue. It responds. When persuasion becomes a pattern, it reveals inner conflict. The mind senses that something is not flowing naturally, yet continues to push out of fear of loss or disappointment. This pushing drains energy and creates tension. Stillness reveals this tension and allows the mind to question whether effort is being applied wisely. In alignment, effort feels light. Actions are met with cooperation rather than resistance. This does not mean that everything is easy, but that effort is proportional and meaningful. The Buddha emphasized that right effort avoids extremes. It is neither forceful nor passive. It moves forward without strain. Alignment also changes communication. When persuasion is no longer needed, words become fewer and clearer. There is no need to over-explain or defend. Truth stands on its own. In Buddhism, truth is not something that must be sold. It is something that reveals itself through experience. By stopping the chase, the mind becomes sensitive to signals it previously ignored. Resistance is no longer seen as an obstacle to overcome, but as information to understand. When something does not respond, it may not be meant to continue. This understanding prevents unnecessary struggle and preserves inner peace. Alignment never demands proof. It does not require reassurance or validation. It is felt as coherence between inner intention and outer conditions. When persuasion disappears, effort becomes sustainable, relationships become honest, and actions become grounded. In this way, alignment simplifies life. It removes the need for force and replaces it with understanding. When the mind stops persuading and starts listening, life unfolds with greater clarity and less resistance. Stopping the chase restores self-respect. Self-respect does not come from pride or ego, but from right understanding and right conduct. When a person chases, they often compromise their inner values without noticing. Chasing slowly teaches the mind that peace and worth must be earned through pursuit, approval, or external success. This belief erodes self-respect because it places value outside the self rather than within awareness and integrity. Chasing encourages overreaching. It leads people to tolerate confusion, inconsistency, and imbalance, simply to keep something moving. In these moments, the mind learns to justify what does not feel right. Each justification weakens inner alignment. Over time, this creates a quiet dissatisfaction, not because something was lost, but because the self was repeatedly overlooked. The Buddha taught that suffering arises when we act against wisdom. When chasing dominates behavior, actions are often driven by fear of loss rather than clarity of intention. This fear-based movement teaches the mind that it must abandon its own boundaries to survive. Self-respect cannot grow in this environment because the mind is not honoring its own understanding. When the chase stops, something subtle but powerful happens. The mind pauses long enough to feel the discomfort that was previously avoided. This discomfort is not failure. It is awareness returning. In this pause, the mind begins to remember its own standards, values, and limits. It becomes possible to say no without guilt and to wait without anxiety. Self-respect is restored when actions align with inner clarity. The Buddha emphasized ethical conduct as a foundation for mental stability. When behavior reflects understanding, the mind becomes calm and confident. It no longer seeks validation because it is grounded in its own integrity. Stopping the chase also changes how one relates to rejection or delay. Instead of internalizing them as personal inadequacy, the mind sees them as natural outcomes of conditions. This perspective protects dignity. It prevents the self from being defined by external response. As self-respect deepens, choices become cleaner. The mind is no longer pulled toward what demands self-betrayal. It becomes selective, not from arrogance but from awareness. This selectivity preserves energy and supports peace. In Buddhism, dignity arises from seeing clearly and acting accordingly. When the chase ends, the mind regains the ability to stand still without fear. This stillness strengthens inner confidence. Self-respect is no longer dependent on success or acceptance. It becomes a natural expression of living in alignment with understanding and truth. What arrives without force is what lasts. Permanence is never promised, but stability is possible. The Buddha taught that all conditioned things are impermanent, yet not all experiences dissolve in the same way. What arises through force carries tension from the beginning. That tension remains embedded within it, shaping how it is experienced and how it eventually fades. When something is forced into existence, it must be continuously held together by effort, fear, or control. Chasing creates conditions of instability. The mind pushes for outcomes before understanding is complete. What is gained through this pressure often brings anxiety rather than peace. There is constant concern about losing what was achieved because it did not arise naturally. The mind senses that what was forced can just as easily fall apart. This awareness creates ongoing restlessness. The Buddha emphasized that suffering comes not only from loss, but from the fear of loss. When something arrives without force, fear is absent or greatly reduced. The mind does not need to protect or manage the experience constantly. It rests within it naturally. This ease is a sign of harmony between conditions. When chasing stops, life begins to offer experiences that fit naturally into one's capacity. These experiences do not overwhelm the mind or demand constant attention. They arrive quietly and settle without disruption. This does not mean they are permanent, but they are stable for as long as conditions support them. The Buddhist path teaches that right conditions lead to right results. When actions are guided by mindfulness, patience, and clarity, outcomes reflect those qualities. What arrives through these conditions carries balance. It does not require force to sustain because it arose through understanding. Lasting does not mean forever. It means that while something exists, it does not create suffering. It does not require vigilance or attachment to maintain. It can be enjoyed without fear and released without collapse. This is the kind of stability the Buddha pointed toward. By letting go of force, the mind stops exhausting itself. It learns to recognize what fits and what strains. This recognition protects peace. When something belongs, it does not demand constant proving. It stays as long as conditions allow and departs when they change. In this way, what arrives without force is what truly lasts, not in duration, but in harmony. It leaves no residue of regret or anxiety. It integrates naturally into life and dissolves naturally when the time comes. This is the quiet wisdom at the heart of the Buddhist path. The Buddha did not teach us to chase a better life. He taught us to stop running from this one. When chasing ends, the mind stops fighting time, uncertainty, and itself. What remains is not emptiness, but clarity. Not loss, but balance. You begin to see that peace was never waiting in the future. It was waiting for the struggle to end. Nothing essential needs to be forced. Nothing true needs to be chased. What belongs to you moves toward you naturally. When the mind is no longer in the way, sit still long enough for life to reveal itself. act without fear. Let go without regret. This is not the end of effort. It is the beginning of wisdom.